Today's guest is Darron Hilaire Jr., who was born in the Turks and Caicos Islands. He's a men's recovery coach and speaker, mentor, youth advocate, and minister. In 2015, Darron became the youngest senior executive leader at Cable and Wireless TCI, where he has built his career as a brand marketing and communications professional over the last 9 years. As a multi-certified trauma recovery coach, Darron has the privilege of meeting people in their stories of heartache and pain and journeying with them towards healing, transformation, and recovery. Darron is also a singer, songwriter, and storyteller. His debut book, Addressing the Pandemic of Fatherlessness in Our Region and World, will be out in 2025. Darron prides himself in saying that his faith in God is at the center and helm of who he is. Let's welcome Darron Hilaire Jr. to Pathways to Success.
Welcome to Pathway to Success. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Hunter. We missed 2 weeks of shows, of course, because we were away, but it's good to be back on Pathway to Success. We have our guest today, Darron Hilaire. And have I pronounced it right? Well, Hilaire?
Yeah, you're one of few people that actually have pronounced it correctly.
Oh, thank you so much. I got that. That's good for me. And so he's here to share his pathway to success. Welcome to Pathway to Success, Darron.
Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity.
And thanks for taking time out to share with all our viewers your story of success. You've decided at a young age to serve your generation by serving others, and I really like that. That shows an unselfish person, a person who has a selfless heart. What inspired this early commitment to youth advocacy and mentorship?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Thank you. There's a few things I think that inspired it. I think firstly, my grandfather was probably the most iconic figure of my childhood. And I think he just embodied, I think, what I like to call a spirit of generosity. And, we grew up in a time when community was lived. It wasn't just talked about. And I think my grandfather, his commitment to his church, his community, his family was something that was always on display in front of me as a little boy. And so I think, I always tried to emulate him in as much ways as I could, even before I knew I was actively probably even doing it. And so I think just sort of his example for me from a young age captivated my heart. And I think I started to live out some of those attributes of what it meant to be a man in today's society, because of what I saw demonstrated in him. I think largely also my uncle, my grandfather's only son, has always been in a part of the education system here in the Turks and Caicos. And it always inspired me to see how he worked with young people as a teacher, as a youth advocate, and as a principal for several years at one of the top performing public high schools here in the country. And I think just sort of seeing his impassioned approach towards helping to develop young people and young men was something that also captivated me from a young age, and just sort of being able to spend, key time with him at certain points of my childhood, adolescent years, and just sort of being able to witness that up close. And then once I got towards the end of my high school tenure is when I met one of the women you shared in one of the photos during my bio, Miss Angela Musgrove, who I think was my first formal mentor. She was the director of youth affairs for the country at the time that I met her. And she was responsible for creating a series of youth leadership and youth empowerment events, and someone who advocated a lot for youth leadership and youth empowerment and youth advocacy. And I think, again, her passion for young people and just her desire to want to see us become leaders and sort of have a voice in how the affairs of society sort of played out, I think was something that was just deeply inspiring. Listening to her just sort of change the temperature of a room, I like to say, with her words and just, with her heart and with her passion and with the things that she wanted to see come alive in Turks and Caicos was something that, again, I got to witness up close, fortunately, in my time before leaving high school. And so even though I didn't know what I wanted to do in terms of career-wise, sort of leaving high school, I always knew I wanted to be a father and a mentor because of how strong those examples were for me. And so I think it set me up very early on to sort of start to serve my generation because of what I saw and the opportunities that I started to get formally and informally in different ways through civic engagement, but also through my engagement in church and the faith.
That's awesome. As a youth, as your role as a youth advocate, and also you're a minister, right? You're a minister.
Not a how do you say I don't know if to say a certified minister, but someone who, I've been preaching since I was 16, 17. So involved in youth ministry per se and preaching, but never really sort of got like an accreditation of sorts for ministry.
How does that evolve? You have been preaching in the church. How has that evolved working with the youth over the past decade in the Turks and Caicos? And what challenges have you faced as a young leader in the corporate world? You're in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Particular as the youngest senior executive. Congratulations at Cable and Wireless TCI.
Yeah, I think as far as youth ministry, youth leadership, I came to faith underneath someone who is a spiritual icon in our generation, Bishop George Fulford. Praise God that he's still alive and, still pretty much contending for the faith, as Jude sort of admonishes us to do. And at the time, his church had one of the more vibrant youth ministries on the island. And he impacted my heart from a very early age through his educational career. I got to have him as a form teacher for my first year of high school before he went into full-time ministry. And he was one of the few men also that early on in my life saw something in me and started to pull it out. And when I sort of joined the school at the time, which I wasn't supposed to be at Madre Basin High School because my mom had prepared for us to attend private school here in Provo, but for some reason the school opening got delayed and I wanted to go to high school, so I pretty much enrolled myself in high school. And he ended up becoming my first form teacher, and he noticed my knack for wanting to learn and wanting to grow, and started pulling me closer to his desk during certain class times, and even started giving me work ahead of my grade level my first year of high school. And I think he wanted me to become a mathematician because he was a math specialist at the time. And but just sort of his impact on me from that age, and just sort of him being someone that pursued me in that way and tried to mold me into something more than what I had envisioned for myself at that time, helped to, again, give me this positive male spiritual influence in my life. And so when I started intentionally taking my faith a bit more intentionally during what would be my senior year of high school, fourth and fifth form, and my high school best friend at the time invited me to church, or his church at the time, where we sort of just went up, and I heard the gospel preached and responded in that moment. It just birthed a fire in us. Growing up, I think in particularly like Pentecostal church traditions, there's a heavy emphasis on like the presence and the power of God. And so I grew up at a time in a generation where there were a lot of a word that I don't hear often enough today, youth revivals. And so we got saved, and we were saved and pursuing our faith during a time when revival was very high, and when a lot of young people were attracted to the faith, and were attracted to and wanted to see the presence and power of God show up in their life. And that's the thing that I think that drove us a lot. And I think just sort of being impacted by youth leaders and other youth ministers during that time and that generation from around the Turks and Caicos, for me, made me realize that this is a great way to serve your generation, and something that I felt within myself as something that I was able to do, just sort of watching other young men who were older than me, sort of do it for their generation and create space for that type of spiritual vibrancy that was happening at the time, when I decided to take my faith seriously. Post high school, early college, community college years, God opened the door for me at the company that I'm currently working at the age of 21, which was beyond anything that I think I could have imagined for myself at the time. And I didn't sort of go in and thinking that I was going to be one of the youngest people in the room, but I sort of started becoming accustomed to being one of the youngest people in the room. And just sort of having to learn how to deal with that. I wouldn't say like there were challenges per se around people perceiving my youthfulness as incompetency. I think one of the things I tried to adapt to very quickly is having a spirit of coachability, or being someone that was coachable. And then I also just more or less leveraged my ability to connect with people and to have relationships and to learn through relationships very quickly, to help me to find my grounding in an industry that I had very little experience with, and listen to mentors of mine who pretty much told me, which allowed me to even pull the trigger on that, who said to me at the time when I accepted the offer, they said, when God opens a door, he gives you the wisdom to walk through it. And so, 9 years later has been, me learning to become acquainted with my sensitivity to God's voice and his wisdom, and learning how to use that to navigate my professional career and professional terrain and landscape of my industry, and the corporate industry or landscape of the Turks and Caicos, and just allowing myself to show up as who I am, and use the abilities and the gifts God has given me to create an impact through the position that he's given me there, or here at this company. Yeah.
So I said, congratulations, being one of the youngest exec at Cable and Wireless TCI. That's awesome. That's amazing. You do so much things. How do you balance your professional responsibilities in brand marketing, communications, with your passion also for the other things, the youth and ministry? How do you balance all of that? What time do you find to balance all that?
Yeah, I mean, time. I'm rich. I'm very rich in time. Single, no kids. So
I like that. Very rich and very rich. That's true. I like that. I like that.
I think it's I guess how you use these moments or seasons of singleness and dating off and on, and that just sort of more or less allow you to figure out how you apply yourself and how you use that time. And so I think that's the balancing factor for me. I knew very early on that I was not a careerist. So my interest was not in, climbing to the next rank or immediately climbing to the next rank on the corporate ladder and such. And so it was always important for me that the kids that I impacted saw a very balanced lifestyle of someone who was making an impact in his professional career, but someone who was also balancing that with, the investments that I made in sort of growing my faith and in Christ and serving my community. And I think one of the things I learned later on was investing in care and rest and serving from a place of restedness, as opposed to just trying to balance all of these things and thinking that you're superhuman, and more or less, just sort of living in this hustle friendly culture and sort of buying into that and giving into that, and thinking that what you're doing and your achievements are the pinnacle of your identity, if you will. Like I knew and started to grasp, particularly as we moved into 2020 and like post-pandemic years, that rest and care was going to be something that was extremely important. And just this ability to create moments of pause, while the world was on pause, just taking advantage of, for some, thankfully us who are still alive today, the opportunity to use some of the things we learned, if we learned them during the pandemic, and to enact and to continue to create space for these spiritual disciplines, if you will, in our lives: rest and Sabbath and slowing down and silence and solitude are very important aspects of my life today. And so thankfully that also blends with my company's policies that also came out of the pandemic to some extent, but also just decisions that were made by leadership, where we're one of the few companies that offer unlimited paid time off.
Really? My
That's
God, my producer said what? I mean, apparently she's planning to apply. You almost got my producer resigned on me, and now she planned to apply. So I gotta. That means my attorneys have to write you for that one.
oh man. Listen, I always get that reaction when I say that, and it's I think one of the fear of companies sort of doing that is sort of not trusting people to manage that well. So there's just sort of the fear of employees sort of abusing the system type thing, and I think there will always be some degree of that. But then at the same time, I think there's a sense of empowerment that comes with trusting your employees to take advantage of that time. And for me, it doesn't mean taking every month off or something like that, but it is sort of allows me to
Yeah, people's laughing in the studio audience. I mean, with what you just said, they're thinking of it on off.
Yeah, no, yeah, I could see how that would be some people's aim, but it does allow me to take moments of rest throughout the year. For me, I like to try to at least take a pause, whether here or abroad, every 3 months, just to sort of reset myself, because so many things happen today in a given day, much less a given month. The murder rates in the country have gone up within the last 10 years since initially I did an event in, I want to say 2015, when the first slew of murders started taking place in the country, that was called Manpower. And that was done in response to sort of the advent of some of these murderous situations sort of starting to happen, and as a way to sort of bring like law enforcement and politicians and at the time the hurting families together, when I think this issue that we see manifesting in our society was to some degree still under to some degree control, if you want to call it that. And now, we're looking, those numbers are climbing. I mean, news report came out on a Sunday afternoon, which was unheard of, someone, being murdered up to today, And so there's so many things that are happening in society that I think people lose sight sometimes of their own health and where they are in their story. Because so much can happen in a day, and grief is one of those things that I think we try to rush people through, especially in this hustle-friendly culture, and we don't appropriately use, or we don't have this freedom sometimes to just grieve. To grieve the things that are not as they were before in our lives, and whether that comes with the loss of a person, whether that comes with the loss of a job, because I can be in and out of the seat any day. You have to still find a way to bring this principle of having moments of pause and moments of restoration and moments of rest into your life. No matter what seat you sit in, no matter how many things you try to balance, like burnout is a very real thing, and you never want to be in a position where you're leading people out of your flesh and out of a place of unrest. And so that's something I try to protect in my life and try to encourage and embody and exemplify in my life for those that are looking at me as a mentor of sorts, or for whatever reason, or a picture of success or what have you. And for me, when they look at me and they see that, or when you look at me and you try to define what success look like, for me, success is the fulfillment of purpose, because purpose is the only thing that gives us identity and prosperity here in the earth. Is what we're made for, right? Doing what God created us to do. And doing that well requires us to, like David, allow God to lead us to lead us beside still waters and restore our soul, and take up advantage of the opportunities for healing and for restoration in our lives when the time comes, and hopefully like another pandemic doesn't have to come to show us the importance of slowing down.
Wow, that's powerful. Before we take a break, though, can you share just briefly the journey of becoming a multi-certified trauma recovery coach? What led you to pursue this path, and explain what does that mean for those who don't know what a trauma recovery coach is?
Sure. So I completed my undergrad in psychology last year, and I got an email pretty much from an organization that I follow that does trauma recovery certifications right at the end of my last submission of my assignment. And so I had a 3-month window before graduation, and the program was 3 months itself. So through some assistance from sponsors, I was able to jump into a 3-month trauma recovery certification program with an organization out of the US. And I think there's a few things to understand when we talk about trauma. And then I think we're today in a society where a lot of people, because of social media and because like mental health and all of these things are becoming the new buzzwords. There are people that are picking up terminology from the field of mental health or mental health practitioners and such that they're following and such, but not always understanding sometimes how to use those things and how how that aids us towards what healing and recovery is supposed to look like. And I was one of those people. And so I wanted to understand more closely, like, how do we recover? So I had the option of pursuing my graduate to become a certified counselor, which was going to take a much longer time and a path that I knew I didn't necessarily, at least by the end of my my degree, I knew I didn't want to go down that path. And so coaching or having a much more relative certification for me was the path that I chose. And so one of the things to understand about trauma is that trauma, and I think we have to separate what or sort of define sometimes what trauma is. And sometimes we talk about events in our lives, difficult events in our lives, or what some practitioners call like adverse childhood experiences, divorces, abuse, all of these different things that impact how we develop into mature human beings, emotionally, physically, developmentally. And so there's the tragedy, there's the event that happens to us. And then we think that because those events happen to us, that automatically we're traumatized. But what a lot of researchers are saying today is that the only way trauma doesn't automatically embed itself into the body because of an event that happened or something, or even something that we needed to happen to us and not happening to us. Trauma only embeds itself into the body as when that event happens, and there is no one there to respond to us with care, with kindness, with the support that we need, right? I remember one example being, I heard someone use in a podcast, is that the people from 9/11 who went home and they had someone to hold them, to embrace them, to be with them in their suffering and in their fear and and whatever it is that they were feeling coming out of an event like that, those people recovered. But the people who went home and didn't have someone to sit with them in their brokenness, and after an event has happened, those people are the people who are being impacted by trauma. And so once trauma sort of embeds itself into our bodies, it can have, a visceral amount of effects that manifest as disease, or some of the mental health struggles or conditions that we see today. Depression and high blood pressure, all of these things are manifestations sometimes of the fact that trauma still is living itself out into our body. And then there is racialized trauma, which is something that we not so much uniquely face as Black people, but it is something that I think deeply impacts us as Black people in a post-emancipated world, who are still being affected by historical and intergenerational effects of being a people who have just sort of lived under oppressive regimes, and some of us who are still doing that, whether that's in the ways of structured regimes, or just sometimes policies and people that we encounter, people that we work with, different things like that, that still allow oppression to sort of play itself out in different ways in our society. And we're carrying those things inside our bodies in ways that have not been attended to well by someone who is trauma informed and can see and notice and hear and ask questions to ascertain whether or not you are carrying a certain degree of trauma from a particular event. And so those traumas are not recovered within us. And so there are far more people walking around, unfortunately, with compounded degrees of trauma inside their body that is having an impact on how they live out their lives. And so I think, I don't know if I answered your question directly. Once I started to become familiar with that and started becoming more familiar with the trauma that existed in my own life, I started pursuing it as a way for me to recover and heal first, my body, my soul, my brain, and then yeah, more or less just sort of kept on the path of trying to grow through different certification programs in different modalities in different fields to just sort of open my knowledge base a bit wider and to be able to hold space for people going through varying degrees of tragedy and trauma.
That's good. Great. We're going to take a short break on Pathway to Success, and we'll be right back with Darron Hilaire.
Did you pick out this detergent all by yourself? So cute.
It's half the size and it's half the plastic. And there's nothing cute about unnecessary plastic. Christy, the average person generates over 200 pounds of plastic a year. And there are 329 million of us in the US alone.
Do you want paper or paper? Yeah.
7th generation Easy Dose laundry detergent. Half the size, half the plastic, all the clean.
So where were we?
The playoff.
Oh, yes. Only a handful of teams remained, hailing from kingdoms far and wide across the college football land, all vying for a spot in the playoffs. Each team led by a great coach, fearless players, and defended by the loyalist of fans. Soon, they would take part in an epic playoff battle for the right to call themselves national champions. And to the victor go the spoils, a beautiful trophy, a grand celebration, and bragging rights that stand the test of time.
And then what happened?
We'll find out soon.
Ready? All clear. Come on out.
This ship is now under the command of the First Order.
Live your Star Wars story in a new 2-night adventure.
You know what I've come for.
Only at Walt Disney World Resort.
Welcome back to Pathway to Success. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Hunter, and we're with Darron Hilaire Jr. And wow, what an amazing young man he is. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, in your work as a trauma recovery coach, what has been the most rewarding experience for you? And two, I noticed you spoke about different mentors, different male figures in your life who have assisted you along your journey, but I've never heard you mention anything about your biological father.
Okay. let's okay. Yeah, so coach is probably I think I use the word because it's most familiar to people, and so I essentially do have a coaching certification. I don't have a coaching practice per se. So the most recent thing that I was able to do is facilitate a 10-week program with men from West Coast, East Coast, United States, so Portland, Ormond Beach, Florida, Michigan, and two guys who are from Prince Edward Island in Canada, and so we did a 10-week program based around some familiar stuff that all of us were going through, and they asked me to facilitate that session for them throughout the summer. So it left me quite drained, but also I think that's probably the latest highlight, sort of just being very fresh in this journey of since I've sort of had the certifications coming into earlier this year. Yeah, my dad. My dad died. I want to say almost 8.5 years ago now. So I was 22. And yeah, so that's, I think, probably one of the reasons why you won't hear me sort of mentioning him a lot in my story. I think we had, unfortunately, just a very short-lived relationship. I think during my childhood, there are some very prominent moments that he showed up, and his health started to fail somewhere during my time in high school. And so I think some of those things just sort of impacted proximity. My parents sort of got separated when we were much younger. I think I was around 5 or 6 years old. And so just a myriad of these different things sort of impacted our closeness to some degree, and just sort of his involvement in my life. That, I had to learn. I think I started to process mostly after, he departed this earth. And so I think that was a significant blow for me, because it happened very early in my life. It happened very early in the beginning of my career. I forfeited my first scholarship. Actually, I think I sort of attribute that to sort of emotional overwhelm now in my life when I look back at it. And just, and so I think I'm only now actually able to dive into some of the more positive aspects of my story and some undiscovered aspects of my family history, as far as my dad's side of the family, that I'm becoming a bit more attuned with now, that I've been able to resolve how his departure in different ways impacted my development from very early on, and then again after sort of just him sort of permanently not being here. And so, yeah, that's been the journey, sort of like one of the central parts of my journey also, that has been intermingling with these other parts of my life over the last 8, almost 9 years now.
My condolences. How does your passion for performing arts, songwriting, storytelling influence your work in youth advocacy and ministry?
Yeah, I don't know if it so much influences youth work per se. I think storytelling is where all of my worlds intersect. So marketing communications is a form of storytelling professionally, being a worship leader or serving in worship ministry, sort of since very early in my faith.
So you sing also, Darron. Wow, that'd be great to hear. We should have gotten a clip of you doing praise and worship.
So I think that in itself is a I guess a form of storytelling. I think that I'm now appreciating it as a form of storytelling when you think of gospel music, and even what was formerly, or what is called, like Negro spirituals. A lot of the music that came out of Black traditions and Black cultures, and from oppressive people, told stories of how God brought us through. And I think that is expressed as an art form through our worship. And it is also a form of healing, if you will, somatic healing that happens in our bodies. Um, once our bodies become engaged in praise and in worship, right? And so I think I'm starting to appreciate that aspect of storytelling that comes through worship and through music and through songwriting, a bit more, and something that I want to dive a bit more into. And then, yeah, the modality of coaching that I pursued is a form of coaching that is regarded as story work, so narrative informed trauma care, right? And so you sort of um, people, you sort of create a space for people to bring stories of harm, and you sort of embody this aspect of learning to sit with people in their stories and provide them with direction, or just sort of engage them through curiosity, as they sort of allow these stories to emerge from their memories and from their experience and from their memory, over time, in ways that they can engage them and deal with them and recover them, hopefully towards some degree of healing and neural integration that happens in their brains, once they sit with someone who is a compassionate witness, we like to say, in their story, and help to shoulder some of those burdens and sort of guide them towards a place of safety in their stories.
What themes or messages do you convey through your music and storytelling, and especially your upcoming book addresses the issue of fatherlessness? What is well, I guess what I know what now I know what inspired you to talk to but what inspired you to tackle this topic?
Yeah, I think, the tenets of my story that definitely sort of impacted the way that I write. And I think also, to my surprise, seeing my story, or parts of my story, being lived out through other young people, that I've come across in the last 10 plus years of just sort of, serving young people in different ways, and realizing that, that something is wrong here, and so fatherlessness is one of those things. I think comparatively, you have, parts of the United States, that, or even parts of Europe that are significantly plagued by like homelessness, even down to countries like Hawaii, which is sort of like these big tourist destinations and such. Like homelessness is a big thing that's impacting those parts of the world. And I think the only thing that compares in our region, to that degree of suffering, or that type of social malaise, malady, if you will, is this disease, if you will, of fatherlessness, that is impacting our region. And I think, the more I dove into, sort of my own story, or trying to understand, um, uh, the trauma around some of it, and sort of reading different books, some of which you see behind me and such, I started to realize that this was an even bigger issue than I imagined. Right, it's a very historical issue, if you will. I like to call fatherlessness a type of emotional homelessness, because while you even have fathers who probably are physically present in their home, sometimes they're physically present but emotionally absent. And sometimes even, fathers who are physically present, but they advocate their spiritual responsibility to train and coach and disciple their kids. And so I think fatherlessness, is a very layered experience. It's not, um, this permanent fixated identity and label that I think we put on people who just have, a father who died or a father who was absent for different reasons. But I think it's a very layered effect that affects us developmentally in more ways than I think a lot of people are attuned to. So that's why I started looking a bit more closely and holistically at the problem of fatherlessness. And I noticed, just in a lot of my research and in my own process of healing, some of the gaps and things that I wish had been said, things that I wish had been said differently. And I wanted to bring that out. And the way that I got the opportunity to write, or if I got the opportunity to write, which is now sort of, in this book that, hopefully I'll be able to present to the world.
But when will that book be out? It should be a good book. I mean,
really next year, I want to say. That's the hope. So the writing process, I think, is done now, but ideally next year.
Okay. Well, that's great. What role, because as you know, how has your Christian faith shaped your approach to leadership, both in your professional and personal life? Two questions, A and B, one. And then what role does faith play in work as a trauma recovery coach?
Yeah, professional, personal life. I think faith is at the center of everything I do. I think it is God who gives us, like I said earlier, the wisdom and the ability, and who admonishes us, to be excellent in what we do and to serve others as if we are serving Him, more or less. And so I think I try to adopt that spirit of excellence in everything that I do, whether that's study, whether that's how I present myself as a professional. I think just sort of a mark of excellence and service and servant leadership and humility, and bringing my best to what I do, and approaching that with an attitude of serving the people around me, in terms of my colleagues, but also I think our customers, and sort of keeping in mind just sort of some of the things that people are going through and dealing with them. On that basis, I think brings a much more personal approach to work and to customer service and customer experience and how we connect and engage and how we do business. And very early on, I learned that part of the mission of the company that I work for was connecting communities and transforming lives. And so I knew that looked different in terms of like corporate social responsibility and how we presented ourselves as a professional or corporate citizen in the society, but I also knew that aligned with some aspect of how I was sort of carrying myself in my personal life. And so it almost as if my two worlds connected in some way. And I tried to bring that out in some of the things we get to do as a company, some of the ways or some of the products and things that we create to serve our customers, essentially. And so I think that's where both of those things connect. And most of my programs, my training, my education, my academics, thankfully have been faith informed. So the university that I went to was a Christian university. The certification programs that I went to were very theology-based, biblically informed programs. And so that has never been second to me sort of choosing to do something. It's always been in the front seat.
Wow, I like that. How do you see your connection between your work in corporate leadership and your commitment to community service and ministry? And the other question I want to ask you, looking ahead, what are your long-term goals for your work in youth advocacy, ministry, and trauma recovery? And how do you plan to achieve them in the next 5 years?
So ask the first question again.
How do you see the connection between your work in corporate leadership and your commitment to community service and ministry?
Yeah, I think, obviously just more or less, me having a good place to go to on a daily basis to work, I think helps to fuel my ability to do other things in my life. Um, and so, yeah, I think just yeah, that's I think as simple as that for me. Yeah, I love what I do, and on all aspects of my life, um, and I think that shows, you know, and I hope that's something that always will show in the way I bring my presence to a space, whether that's professional work or community service, and just sort of the opportunities that I get to pursue. Um, I think for me, service will probably look differently and just in some ways to some extent. I think mentorship is going to be something that will probably be consistent throughout the rest of my life. Just sort of more or less with God putting people in my path to be able to do life with in those ways, whether that's through a formally structured ministry or just through my encounters with people in the workplace or people that I encounter through traveling or such. That will always be something that will be a part of what I do. I think service to my community is something that's also ever evolving in the same way, just as sort of my time gets chewed up a little bit more with professional responsibilities. And there's some seasons of work that are definitely just much more heavier than others. And so we're about to, move into one of our heaviest seasons of the year, which is Christmas. Which for some people is just time off, but for us it's one of the biggest commercial periods of the year. So there's a lot of planning that goes into that. And then this is also the time of the year where we plan for the year ahead. So things are about to pick up speed. And so there are seasons of my life where there will be opportunities for me to serve in ways that I don't often get to. And there are seasons of my life where I now have no problem sort of scaling back on some of those commitments to make sure that I am showing up, like I said earlier, from a place of restedness, and I'm serving in the spaces that I'm serving in from a place of pure-heartedness, restedness, and just being grounded, by God's presence and what He has to say to me during a given time, and how He wants to use me to serve in different ways in my community and my job and my church, what have you, and just living a very spirit-led life. And so I think that's the character and the shape of what my life will be as I progress into now my 30s. And just I think naturally, because of experience, wisdom gain, things that I probably want to look a bit more closely into as a subject matter of research and the ways that will impact my writing. I think those are the things that will sort of just more or less fill my life over the next 5 years. Hopefully, one of those things being marriage and family. And so it's my prayer and my heart for myself and for me, I think widely, I think I will always desire to some degree to lend my voice to some of the social ills that are happening in our community and serving in different ways, whether that's through public boards or
maybe politics.
Maybe politics, because I think there's a lot, that can be done. One of the articles that you had up talking about amnesty, one of the things I wrote in that article was the fact that crime and some of the challenges we're experiencing with our young man, to some degree, at the time that I wrote that article, I said, it was a 10-year-old issue, right? And then I used this analogy that, if you are a mother trying to, for instance, just sort of impact a boy who is misbehaving, if you don't understand the boy, or understand how boys work, or understand how to reach the boys, you might say, oh, the boy is out of order, or it's out of hand. And I think sometimes we treat social issues the same way, where we have a very young problem. And sometimes that problem is very gendered because of some of the names and faces that we see coming up in some of the social issues. I think the question we have to ask is, do we have the right people addressing the problem? Or are the people looking at the problem, if we look at our boys without an understanding of how the boys work, and just not able to impact, speak, reach those boys because we just don't have that understanding. And so saying a problem is out of order, it's out of hand, when realistically we still are dealing with a very young issue. And so I think we still have a window of time to get things under control to some degree. And hopefully with some of the things that I get to create, and some of the things that I get to write, and some of the things that I get to do, hopefully the people that I get to impact will start to impact others, and we will start to see some of these issues sort of significantly being reduced. The more men in particular and women in particular start to understand the way God has sort of created us to work in this blessed alliance, if you will, together, and reduce a lot of the gender wars that we're seeing and the confusion that we're seeing in society. More men, and men and women alike start to take their place in their role a bit more seriously and intently in society, and start to heal themselves and start to heal their bodies. And that collective healing starts to reverberate throughout our society. I think every society and the things that we see belching themselves out into society is largely sometimes, yes, a result of sin, but also a mirror of sometimes what we're carrying around in our collective soul as a community and as a people, in ways that have been unattended to and unaddressed. And so I think changing the world begins with, one, the salvation of your soul, and then two, the healing of your body, and being able to intentionally look into areas of your life that are impacted by trauma and brokenness, that are still leaking itself out into the way that you present yourself into the world, into the choices that you make for your family, for your profession, for your life, and for your future.
Wow, I love that. 5 years from now, where can you see yourself quickly?
Say that again.
The next 5 years from now, where can you see yourself?
That feels like a mystery, honestly, right now. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the safest answer right now is, to say, traveling the world and sharing, more about some of the things that I love, and being able to bring hope and healing and inspiration to not just my country, but the region and other parts of the world. I think that's the way I'll answer that.
Okay, wow, I love that. Wow, what a great show with Darron Hilaire Jr. Such a young man of great intellect, vision, and a young man that is on a path of success. I want to thank you for taking time out to share with us your inspirational story and inspire us on pathway to success. In the bite for this week, you can do all things through Christ that strengtheneth you. Keep your eyes on the goal. Have a great week for us at Pathway to Success. Thank you again, Darron.
Thank you too.